Florence and Debussy, stay by the counter.
I was the pharmacist in charge. People brought prescriptions
The
to
jury heard this pharmacy became one of the largest oxycodone purchasers in New
a
Jersey.
busy pharmacy field comes through the door.
Once is a mistake, twice is suspicious. Florence and Debussy did this for 3 straight years across millions of pills and left a paper trail written in the pharmacy's own records.
This was not ordinary dispensing, it was a diversion conspiracy.
You are making one closed storefront sound like the whole opioid crisis belonged to me.
She would not be filling another prescription. The federal indictment in the hand of the agent across the counter from her ran 43 pages. Conspiracy to distribute oxycodone. Maintaining a premises for the illegal distribution of controlled substances. More than 2.75 million oxycodone pills purchased through her single Trenton storefront across 4 years. 64,000 of them unaccounted for in her own pencil-written ledger. By the time Judge Zahid Qureshi handed down her sentence, Florence and Debussy would be 66 years old, walking into a 10-year federal prison sentence and leaving behind a 31-year career as a licensed pharmacist and a community that had trusted her every single month with its medicine cabinet. Quick question before we go any further. When was the last time you actually looked at the pharmacist behind the counter when you picked up a prescription? Really looked? Drop your honest answer in the comments below. And if you are not subscribed to this channel yet, hit that button right now. We covered the cases the local news buries in the second half of the broadcast, and this one is going to stay with you. Florence Ifeoma Ndubuisi was born in 1960 in the southeastern Nigerian state of Anambra, the third of 7 children in a family that had survived the Biafran War by the narrowest of margins. Her father was a secondary school mathematics teacher in Onitsha. Her mother sold dried fish and palm oil from a wooden stall at the main market on the bank of the Niger River. The family rebuilt slowly through the 70s. Florence walked 2 miles each way to St. Monica's Catholic School in Onitsha, wearing the same starched white blouse 3 days running because there was only the one. She was, according to a primary school report card her oldest sister would later keep, in a tin biscuit box, exceptionally neat, exceptionally quiet, and exceptionally accurate. That last word would stay with her. She enrolled at the University of Nigeria, Nsukka, in 1978 on the pharmacy track. She graduated with a Bachelor of Pharmacy degree in 1983. She worked for 2 years at a hospital dispensary in Enugu under a senior pharmacist named Sister Maureen Ezeagu, a Sacred Heart nun who taught her to count tablets onto a metal tray with a triangular spatula and to write every entry in a logbook in block capitals. In 1986, with $800 American sewn into the lining of a winter coat she had never needed in Nigeria and a sponsorship letter from a cousin in Hyattsville, Maryland, she boarded a Pan Am flight from Lagos to New York. She was 26 years old. She had never seen snow. The American licensure process took her 4 years. She worked overnight shifts at a chain pharmacy in Hyattsville while studying for the Foreign Pharmacy Graduate Equivalency examination at a kitchen table at her cousin's apartment. She passed on her second attempt. The New Jersey Board of Pharmacy issued her a registered pharmacist license in 1990. The license number, RPH 29847, would appear on every single controlled substance order form the DEA later subpoenaed, and on the framed certificate that hung above the consultation counter at Healthcare Pharmacy for 15 years. She met Gordian Anaeto Ndubuisi in 1991 at a Nigerian Catholic Association picnic in Branch Brook Park in Newark. He was an accountant with a master's degree from Rutgers and a sideline practice doing tax preparation for Nigerian American families across central Jersey. They married in 1992 at Our Lady of Mount Carmel in Asbury Park. They bought their first house, a small split level, in Ewing Township in 1994. They had 2 children, a daughter, Chinwe, in 1995, a son, Obi, in 1998. For the first decade of her American career, Florence Ndubuisi was, by every available measure, the version of the immigrant pharmacist that orientation pamphlets are written around. She worked at 3 different chain pharmacies between 1990 and 2002. Her annual performance evaluations described her as dependable, discreet, with sensitive prescriptions, and, in one 1998 review entered into evidence by the defense at trial, the most accurate counter-pharmacist in the district. She picked up extra shifts on Sundays after Mass. She paid down her cousin's loan in 4 years. She sent money home to Onitsha every month for her mother's blood pressure medication, which the family in Nigeria could not reliably obtain. In 2002, she and Gordian put together a down payment on a small commercial building on East State Street in Trenton, 3 blocks from the New Jersey State House. They named the new business Healthcare Pharmacy. Florence was the pharmacist in charge. Gordian handled the books, the lease paperwork, the relationships with the 3 wholesalers they used, and the quarterly tax filings. They hired 2 pharmacy technicians and a delivery driver. The grand opening was photographed for the Trentonian. Florence appeared in the photograph in a freshly pressed white coat, hands folded carefully in front of her, smiling carefully at the camera. For the next 10 years, Healthcare Pharmacy was an ordinary independent pharmacy in a struggling neighborhood. They filled prescriptions for blood pressure medication and diabetes supplies and pediatric antibiotics. They delivered methadone to a halfway house on Perry Street under a contract with a county addiction recovery program. They sponsored a youth soccer team in the East Trenton Recreation League in 2008. Florence sat on the parish council at her church in Princeton Junction, where the family had moved into a larger colonial in 2006. A handwritten thank you card from a 2011 customer, later entered into the trial record by the defense, described her as the only pharmacist in Trenton who actually looks me in the eye. Then, sometime in 2013, something shifted. The federal indictment did not specify a single triggering event. There was no medical emergency in the family. There was no sudden financial collapse. There was only, in the words of the lead DEA diversion investigator, a steady, deliberate, and methodical pivot in the volume of one specific drug coming through the back door of one specific storefront in a state already drowning in pills. That drug was Oxycodone. And the volume was about to become the largest single pharmacy diversion case the District of New Jersey had ever charged. To understand what Florence and Dubizu did, you have to understand what a retail pharmacy is supposed to be. A neighborhood pharmacy in the United States operates under a layered system of accountability that begins long before any patient walks through the door. Every controlled substance ordered by a pharmacy is logged in a federal database maintained by the Drug Enforcement Administration. Schedule II narcotics, the category that contains oxycodone, require a paper DEA Form 2122 or its electronic equivalent for every wholesale purchase. The pharmacist in charge signs that form personally. Her DEA registration number is printed across the top of it. Inside the pharmacy, every dispensed pill is supposed to be tracked 3 different ways. First, against the original prescription, which must be written by a licensed prescriber for a legitimate medical purpose, within the usual course of professional practice. Second, against the patient's profile in the pharmacy's dispensing software. Third, against the physical inventory in the locked Schedule II safe. At the end of each calendar period, the pharmacist conducts what is called a biennial inventory, a physical pill count, signed and dated, that is supposed to match exactly with the running total in the software. Any discrepancy must be investigated, documented, and, if it exceeds a defined threshold, reported to the DEA on a Form 106. The form is short. It is consequential. Pharmacists do not file it casually. There is one final check. State prescription drug monitoring programs flag patients who fill controlled substance prescriptions at multiple pharmacies, prescribers who write outside their specialty, and pharmacies whose dispensing volume sits outside the statistical norm. New Jersey's program had been operational since 2011. In theory, no single pharmacy can become a major source of diverted oxycodone without setting off alarms in at least 3 independent federal and state systems. In theory, the wholesaler should refuse the order. In theory, the monitoring program should flag the patient. In theory, the DEA's ARCOS database, the automation of reports and consolidated orders system, should produce a quarterly report identifying any pharmacy whose purchases sit outside the curve. Healthcare Pharmacy set off all 3. The systems worked exactly as designed. The wholesalers filed suspicious order reports as early as 2014. The state monitoring program flagged repeat patients who lived in Camden and Newark, filling identical prescriptions in Trenton. The ARCOS database quietly logged every shipment. What the systems could not do was force anyone to act on what they were seeing. That part required a human decision. That decision took almost 3 years. The diversion began on a date the federal indictment was never able to pinpoint exactly. Forensic accountants working backward from the wholesaler invoices placed the inflection point in the first quarter of 2014. In 2013, Healthcare Pharmacy purchased approximately 93,000 oxycodone pills across all dosages, a volume consistent with a small independent pharmacy serving a chronic pain patient population in an underserved neighborhood. It was on the high side of normal. It was not abnormal. In 2014, that number rose to 812,000 pills. The increase was not gradual. Quarterly purchasing records showed the volume nearly tripling between January and April of 2014, then doubling again by the third quarter. By the end of that calendar year, Healthcare Pharmacy was purchasing more oxycodone than any independent pharmacy in Mercer County and most of the regional chain stores combined. The mechanism was specific and repeatable. Florence Ndubizu and 3 pharmacy technicians working under her direction filled prescriptions presented at the counter by individuals she came to know personally over the course of the conspiracy. The prescriptions were technically valid on their face. They were written on legitimate prescription pads. They were signed by a small group of cooperating prescribers operating from offices in Newark, Philadelphia, and Brooklyn. They were dated within the legal refill window. They were, in the precise language of federal regulation, prescriptions issued outside the usual course of professional practice and for no legitimate medical purpose. The patients did not exist as patients. They existed as runners. Court testimony from cooperating witnesses described the pattern. A car would arrive in front of the storefront at a scheduled time. 3 to 5 individuals would enter, one at a time, spaced 2 or 3 minutes apart. Each would present a prescription, a state-issued identification, and cash. Each would walk out within 7 minutes, carrying a small white pharmacy bag containing a 30-day supply of oxycodone in dosages of 15 or 30 milligrams. The pills would be consolidated in the parking lot, repackaged into smaller quantities, and resold at street prices in Camden, Newark, Trenton, and as far south as Wilmington, Delaware. The pharmacy's per-pill profit on a legitimate insurance fill of oxycodone is small. Pennies on the dosage unit, sometimes negative after dispensing costs. Healthcare Pharmacy was being paid in cash, at the full retail price, on prescriptions that bypassed insurance entirely. The unit margin was multiples of the legitimate margin. The cash piled up faster than the Ndubizus could plausibly deposit. In 2015, Healthcare Pharmacy purchased 917,000 oxycodone pills. In 2016, 834,000. Through the first 8 months of 2017, 206,000 more. In total, across the relevant period, Florence Ndubizu's single storefront on East State Street ordered, received, and accounted for more than 2.75 million dosage units of oxycodone. The equivalent, by one DEA expert's trial calculation, of a 30-day supply for every adult resident of the city of Trenton and half the population of neighboring Hamilton Township combined, out of one storefront, with a single working pharmacist behind the counter. The records were the second half of the scheme. Florence personally maintained the dispensing logs that were supposed to reconcile pills purchased against pills dispensed. She wrote in pencil. She kept a yellow legal pad alongside the electronic system, in a desk drawer in the back office, beneath a tin of peppermints. When wholesale orders exceeded what could plausibly be reconciled against patient prescriptions, she adjusted the entries. Fictitious patient names appeared in the dispensing software. Prescription numbers were duplicated. A 2016 internal audit, ordered by the pharmacy's own liability insurer, was completed by Florence herself and submitted with all reconciled inventories matching to the pill. She knew the system. She had operated inside it for 24 years. She knew exactly which forms the DEA reviewed during a routine inspection and which they did not. She knew the threshold at which a wholesaler would file a suspicious order report. She knew that the state monitoring program flagged patients, but not pharmacies. She knew that the biennial inventory was the only physical pill count federal regulators were guaranteed to look at. She made each biennial inventory match. She wrote the numbers herself. For 3 years and 8 months, the numbers matched. The end of healthcare pharmacy began with a database query. In the spring of 2017, a diversion investigator named Marisol Quintero, working out of the DEA's Newark Field Division, ran a routine geographic analysis of ARCOS data for the state of New Jersey. The query was supposed to flag pharmacies whose Oxycodone purchasing volume sat more than 3 standard deviations above the median for pharmacies of comparable size and patient population. One result came back at the top of the list: Healthcare Pharmacy, 1247 East State Street, Trenton, New Jersey. DEA registration in the name of Florence Thafires Ndubizu, RPH 29847. The numbers were not subtle. Healthcare Pharmacy was buying Oxycodone at a rate 26 times the median for independent pharmacies in its zip code. It was buying more Oxycodone than the CVS 3 blocks away on Hamilton Avenue, the Walgreens by the train station, and the Rite Aid in Lawrenceville combined. The query result, printed on a single sheet of office paper, sat on Quintero's desk for 2 days before she walked it into her supervisor's office. Quintero opened a diversion file in April of 2017. The file number was 17 NWK DI 0412. Over the next 4 months, she and a team of 3 additional diversion investigators conducted a quiet workup. They pulled 5 years of wholesale invoices. They pulled the state monitoring program's data on every prescriber who had written controlled substance prescriptions to healthcare pharmacy. They obtained surveillance of the storefront from a drug task force vehicle parked across East State Street on 3 separate weekdays in June and July of 2017. The surveillance was definitive. On a single Tuesday in June, investigators counted 47 individuals entering the pharmacy across a 4-hour window. Of those 47, 31 departed within 5 minutes, carrying small white pharmacy bags. Of those 31, 23 got into one of 4 vehicles parked along the block. 3 of the 4 vehicles were registered to addresses in Newark and Camden, addresses outside any reasonable pharmacy service area for a Trenton storefront. The 4th was registered to a body shop in North Philadelphia that had been the subject of an unrelated narcotics investigation in 2015. On August 28, 2017, the DEA presented its findings to the United States Attorney's Office for the District of New Jersey. The office authorized an immediate suspension order. On August 31, 2017, 4 DEA agents and 2 diversion investigators walked into healthcare pharmacy at 11:14 in the morning, while Florence Ndubizu was standing behind the counter, counting hydrocodone tablets into a 30-count vial for a customer who actually was who his prescription said he was. The lead agent placed a signed order to show cause and immediate suspension on the counter beside her. He read the contents aloud. The pharmacy's authority to handle controlled substances was suspended, effective immediately. The Schedule II safe was sealed. The dispensing computer was imaged on site. The yellow legal pad, the pencil-written dispensing log Florence had maintained in a back-office drawer for 3.5 years, was photographed in place, then bagged and taken into evidence. Florence Ndubizu did not say anything for the first 6 minutes. She finished counting the hydrocodone tablets. She set them down on the counter beside the suspension order. She removed her white coat, folded it carefully along the existing creases, and placed it on the chair behind her. Then she asked, in a voice that 2 of the agents would later describe in their reports as remarkably steady, whether she was permitted to call her husband. She was. She did. She told Gordian, in English, and then briefly in Igbo, that the pharmacy was closed. The forensic phase of the case took 18 months. The Schedule II safe at Healthcare Pharmacy, when inventoried by DEA agents on the afternoon of August 31, 2017, contained approximately 11,000 oxycodone tablets. The wholesale record showed that Healthcare Pharmacy had received, between April of 2015 and the day of the suspension, more than 2,100,000 oxycodone tablets. The dispensing software showed that approximately 2,036,000 of those had been dispensed against prescriptions on file. The math was the case. Investigators went line by line through the dispensing software, cross-referenced against the state monitoring program, against the prescription files physically present in the back office, and against the wholesale order ledger Florence had maintained in pencil on the yellow legal pad. The reconciliation produced a single number that became the centerpiece of the federal indictment: 64,112 oxycodone pills. 64,000 pills purchased by Healthcare Pharmacy between April 2015 and August 2017 that could not be reconciled against any prescription, any patient, any insurance claim, any return to wholesaler record, any waste disposal log, or any biennial inventory adjustment. 64,000 pills that had walked into the pharmacy and walked out again without leaving any documentation that they had ever existed inside its four walls. The yellow legal pad told the rest of the story. Forensic document examiners compared the entries on the pad to the entries in the electronic dispensing software. They found 1,147 entries on the pad that did not appear in the software. They found 2,201 entries in the software that did not appear on the pad. They found a separate column on the right-hand side of every page, written in a different shade of pencil, that listed 2-letter codes and 3-digit numbers. The codes corresponded to the initials of cooperating runners. The 3-digit numbers corresponded to the number of pills handed across the counter that day. The cooperating runners began coming in late in the fall of 2017. There were eventually 7 of them. Each one, in proffer interviews recorded on video, described the same pattern. Each one identified Florence and Dubizu by photograph. Each one described conversations conducted across the consultation counter in lowered voices, about pricing, about scheduling, about which days of the week the pharmacy could absorb a larger order without the wholesaler asking questions. The investigation is in the rear view now. The trial and the sentencing are still ahead. If this case has held your attention this long, the next 8 minutes are why. Subscribe before we get into the courtroom. We do this every single week, and these stories do not get the coverage they deserve. The husband, Gordian and Dubizu, was the smaller half of the federal case. A separate forensic accounting review found that between 2014 and 2017, the Ndubizus had deposited more than $470,000 in unexplained cash into personal accounts at 3 different banks. The deposits were structured in amounts just below the $10,000 federal currency transaction reporting threshold. Gordian, the accountant, knew the threshold. He had built his own tax preparation practice around it. He would be charged separately in a parallel indictment with 3 counts of tax evasion. The first formal interview of Florence and Dubizu took place on September 14, 2017, 2 weeks after the suspension order, in a windowless conference room on the 4th floor of the DEA Newark Field Division building. Her attorney, a defense lawyer from a Princeton firm named Howard Reisman, sat to her left. 2 diversion investigators sat across the table. The interview was video recorded. Florence wore a navy blue cardigan, a cream-colored blouse, and the same small gold cross she had worn in the 2002 grand opening photograph. Her hands were folded in her lap. She did not touch the cup of water that had been placed in front of her. The lead investigator placed the yellow legal pad on the table, inside a clear evidence sleeve. "Mrs. Ndubizu, do you recognize this ledger?" "That is a pharmacy log, yes." "Is the handwriting on this page yours?" "It is my handwriting." "Can you tell me what the entries in the right-hand column represent?" "Those are notations, inventory notations." "Can you tell me what the 2-letter codes mean?" There was a pause of approximately 11 seconds on the video recording. Florence looked down at the table. She looked at her attorney. She looked back at the investigator. "I would prefer not to answer that question." Mrs. Ndubizu, between April of 2015 and August of 2017, Healthcare Pharmacy received over 2,100,000 Oxycodone tablets. The dispensing software accounts for approximately 2,036,000 of them. There is a gap of more than 64,000 pills. Can you account for those pills? The pause this time was longer. Howard Reisman placed a hand on her forearm. She did not look at him. I have always maintained accurate records. I have been a pharmacist for 31 years. That is not an answer to the question I asked. I am answering the only question I am prepared to answer. The interview ended 7 minutes later. Reisman terminated it on his client's behalf. Florence Ndubizu stood, smoothed the front of her cardigan with both hands, and walked out of the conference room without making eye contact with either investigator. She did not speak to federal investigators outside the presence of a courtroom for the next 7.5 years. The federal grand jury sitting in Trenton returned a sealed indictment against Florence Ndubizu on March 9, 2022. The charges were conspiracy to distribute oxycodone in violation of 21 U.S.C., paragraph 846, and maintaining a drug-involved premises in violation of 21 U.S.C., paragraph 856. Gordian Ndubizu was indicted in a separate document on 3 counts of tax evasion. The indictments were unsealed at arraignment 2 weeks later. The case was assigned to United States District Judge Zahid N. Qureshi, sitting in the Clarkson S. Fisher Federal Building and U.S. Courthouse on East State Street in Trenton, 4 blocks from the storefront where the conspiracy had operated for 3.5 years. Pre-trial motions consumed 32 months. Reisman moved to suppress the yellow legal pad on Fourth Amendment grounds, arguing the search of the back office drawer had exceeded the scope of the suspension order. The motion was denied. He moved to exclude the cooperating runner testimony on hearsay and reliability grounds. The motion was denied. He moved to sever Florence's trial from Gordian's. That motion, the only one of consequence he won, was granted. Trial opened on January 8, 2025. It lasted 2 weeks. The government called 19 witnesses, including all 7 cooperating runners, 3 of the prescribers who had been charged separately and were testifying under cooperation agreements, the DEA diversion investigator Marisol Quintero, 2 forensic accountants, and a pharmacy practice expert from the University of Maryland who walked the jury, hour by hour, through the gap between what Florence Ndubizu's record said and what her wholesale invoices proved. The defense called 4 witnesses. 3 were character witnesses from her parish. The 4th was Florence herself. She testified for 1 full day. Under direct examination, she described her education, her career, her commitment to the Trenton community, her belief that every prescription she filled was facially valid, and that the burden of legitimacy rested on the prescriber. Under cross-examination, she was shown the yellow legal pad page by page. She was asked 41 separate times by the lead assistant United States attorney to explain the 2-letter codes. She declined 41 times. The jury watched her decline. On January 22, 2025, the jury returned a verdict after 1 day and 40 minutes of deliberation, guilty on both counts. Sentencing was set for June 11, 2026, in Judge Qureshi's courtroom. The pre-sentence report calculated an advisory guideline range of 121 to 151 months. The government sought a sentence at the top of the range. The defense sought a downward departure based on Florence Ndubizu's age, her lack of prior criminal history, her contributions to the Trenton community, and 17 letters of support submitted by parishioners and former colleagues. 3 victim impact statements were read aloud at sentencing. 2 were from mothers whose adult children had died of oxycodone overdoses in 2016 and 2017, both of whom had been able to trace, through cooperating witness testimony, the specific source pharmacy of the pills found at their sons' bedsides. The 3rd was from a former healthcare pharmacy customer, a 68-year-old woman from Trenton named Doris Whitmore, who had been a legitimate chronic pain patient at the pharmacy for 9 years. I trusted you with my husband's prescriptions until the day he died, Doris Whitmore read, holding the paper steady with both hands. I trusted you with my own after that. I came to your counter once a month for 9 years. You looked me in the eye, and you asked about my grandchildren by name, and you were selling poison out the back of the same store. I do not know which of us you saw as the real customer. I am pretty sure I know the answer. Judge Qureshi delivered the sentence from the bench. Mrs. Ndubizu, the license you held was not an ordinary license. It was a public trust. The state of New Jersey gave you the authority to put controlled substances into the hands of human beings because the state of New Jersey believed, on the basis of your training, your examinations, and your sworn statements, that you would do so within the boundaries of professional practice. You did not do that. You did the opposite of that, deliberately, methodically, and at a scale that this court will describe as among the most serious diversion conduct it has ever seen from a single pharmacist. You did it during the deadliest stretch of the opioid epidemic in the history of this country. The court is required to consider the need for deterrence, and in your case, the court considers it heavily. The sentence was 120 months, 10 years, 3 years of supervised release to follow, a fine of $350,000, the pharmacy license surrendered as a condition of the judgment. Florence Ndubizu, 66 years old, was remanded to the custody of the United States Marshals at the conclusion of the hearing. She is currently serving her sentence at FCI Danbury in Connecticut, a low-security federal correctional institution in the rolling hills of Fairfield County. Her projected release date is in 2034. She will be 74 years old. Gordian Ndubizu was convicted at his separate trial of all 3 counts of tax evasion and is serving a 30-month sentence at FPC Lewisburg in Pennsylvania. Healthcare Pharmacy at 1247 East State Street has been vacant since the day of the suspension order. The hand-painted sign above the door was taken down by a county code enforcement officer in 2019. The space has been on the commercial real estate market for 7 years. No tenant has signed a lease. The neighborhood pharmacy that was supposed to be a break on the opioid crisis, in the deadliest stretch of the opioid crisis, in a city already drowning in pills, became one of the largest single accelerants in the state. The license meant to guard the medicine cabinet was the very thing that pried it open. This case was staggering. But the case on the right-hand side might be the worst single license betrayal we have ever covered on this channel. Click it now.